All right, welcome back to Social Studies. First thing we are doing today is reviewing the first thing we did yesterday, which is thinking about the causes for the American Revolution. This is a test question, okay? I've said that twice. So who thinks they can remember one of the reasons that we had an American Revolution? No, give me one.
The 1763, I think it's where they said, the imaginary line here, you can't go past it, because if you do, I can't tax you.
Right. The Proclamation of 1763 basically says you have to live in the 13 colonies, right? Okay, and we know he didn't want them moving west, not because he was a nice guy. He wanted all their money in taxes. And if you didn't live in the colonies, he couldn't collect your money. Good job. All right, what's another reason? Hudson?
Without taxation with the...
No taxation without representation. Excellent. No taxes, I'm just going to say this, without representation. Okay. Shh. And now we've talked a lot about how they'd take the money and send it back to England. They didn't get any back. Another part of this, though, let me say this. Do you think they were letting any of the colonists, like, run for political office and go to England and help write the laws? No. And I know you haven't learned a whole lot about government. But, like, at the state of Indiana, we have some senators that go to Washington, D.C., and they say, you know what, I don't think the citizens of Indiana would like that law, or I think they need this law. So if we didn't have senators that go to the government and tell them what Indiana needs, do you think they'd kind of forget about us? Yeah, so that was also going on. They didn't have anyone that would go to England and say, listen, the colonists need things. We need roads. We need better this and that. They didn't have that. All right, we had one more thing, and it has to do with a type of tax. Hayden?
The King of England just really wanted money and stuff.
Okay. Does anyone remember what type of tax? I said it was basically like a paper tax. What was it called? Cadence? Forget? Josiah?
Stamp Act.
Stamp Act. Nice job. So the Stamp Act, that's what they called it, but really it was a tax on paper goods.
On our test, we put paper tax, but we do have to put stamp tax.
Put stamp tax. But, you know, when I was little, I don't know. I feel like that made me think more about a stamp on a letter than anything else. So just remember, the Stamp Act was anything made out of paper, which back in this time, a lot of things were made out of paper. All right. So that's a good review. And then yesterday, we learned about how the revolution got started. Who was the commanding general of the Continental Army? Abby? George Washington. Okay. Was he a successful general in leading the United States to victory? Chloe? Okay, so we had a good talk about him, right? So we were feeling very conflicted about him. But was he good on the battlefield and winning battles? Yes. So who won the Revolutionary War? Was it the colonists or the British? Hayden?
Colonists.
The colonists, okay? And I don't know if you've really thought about that, but everybody right now look up here and think about that. How would our lives maybe be different? We can't predict what would have happened. What if Britain had won the Revolutionary War? Everyone think for 20 seconds and then raise your hand and tell me what you're thinking. How could things be different? Giving everybody some thinking time. All right, Quentin, how do you think that things might be different?
Things could be like different, we'd still have to maybe, instead of using these, because we have to pay our taxes and they're not giving us anything back, we would have to use candles instead of like these kind of lights.
Okay, so you're saying if Britain had stayed in charge of this land and never helped us out with, taxes and things we needed, we might not have good school buildings or electricity or all the things that make the country run. That's an interesting thought. Abby?
We wouldn't have the 15 states.
All right, we wouldn't have states, right? If Britain had won, we wouldn't be able to form a country and have states like we have. Noah?
You might not be able to be with black people They would still say no.
Okay. So as the United States, have we been able to write our own laws about how we're going to treat people? Yeah, and we didn't start off on a good track, right? We made a lot of really bad laws at the beginning. Are we still as a nation trying to fix our laws? Yeah. But if we didn't have independence, it would be a whole lot harder for us to be in charge of our laws. Chloe?
All different colored skins will be slaves.
Why do they what?
All different colored skins will be slaves.
Okay. It may have impacted who's free and who's not free. And I will say this. At the time, we watched that Liberty Kids video. And Friends Online, I'm going to share a link about those videos with you later this week. It'll be just something for fun to watch on YouTube. But we did learn there was a comment about slavery in Britain. Did anyone catch that? It was something Sarah said. Josiah?
There's not a lot in Britain, and also everyone will be talking like British. Everyone will have a weird accent.
Yeah, we might have the British accent. So that is something to think about. When the United States was starting to become a country, sorry everyone at home, people in the back, can we please face the forward and listen? Face forward, not the forward. All right. Britain ended slavery way before the United States did. We were one of the last countries to end slavery, so it is something also to think about. So a lot of people in England thought the United States was a backwards nation, which in some ways, did we have some bad ideas? We did, okay? So a lot of people thought very critically of us because of that, as they should have. All right, so that just about wraps it up. I've got to put hands down because we've got to move on or I will ramble about this all day long. Shh, shh. Okay, so today we are learning about Indiana's role. So I need everyone on page 59 in your social studies book. Shh. All right, eyes in your book. I'm going to read it. I want you to follow along. Remember, this is a story, so listen to it like you would any other story. And then we do have a short video that'll show us what I'm going to read to you. Okay, so pay close attention. While most of the fighting during the Revolution was in the colonies on the East Coast, remember the 13 original colonies? There was also some action in the territory to the west, which is where we live. So this is what happened on the land that is now Indiana. The British knew that this territory was not defended well. However, they needed Native Americans there to help, such as the Shawnee. Was that one of our tribes we studied? Yeah. Yep, I just took that display down for this new one, but the Shawnee is one of the tribes we studied that lived in Indiana. So they decided to help the British. The British had a base at Fort Detroit, which is what is now Michigan. So Fort Detroit is one of our northern neighbors, Michigan's fort. Fort Detroit became a major supplier center for British troops in the region. So they would hand out clothes and guns and ammunition, all that good stuff. So if you don't have those supplies, do you think you can fight well?
Nope.
No, they needed those supplies. The British commander at the fort was Henry Hamilton. All right, just like Mr. Hamilton, same name. Hamilton met with the Miami and Potawatomi people. Are those also Indiana tribes? He dressed in clothing similar to what they wore. He was friendly and gave the people food, supplies, and weapons. He then convinced them to use their new weapons against the colonists. The Native Americans raided settlements in Kentucky along the Ohio River, which is our southern border, right? So pretty close to where we live. George Rogers Clark wanted to stop these attacks, all right? So Clark is going to be our hero in the story, so pay attention. He gathered a group of about 175 men. His plan was to capture forts located along the Wabash and Mississippi rivers. Okay, this is getting very close to home. Clark and his men planned to use the forts to stop the Native American attacks. Remember, the Native Americans at this point were sided with the British. Clark and his troops were successful. Clark was even able to convince the Native Americans in the area to stop helping the British. Is that a big deal? Yeah. Eventually, the British commander, Henry Hamilton, left Fort Detroit with his troops. They followed the Wabash River across Indiana toward Fort Sackville and Vincennes. In December 1778, the large British force easily defeated the small group of American soldiers Clark had ordered to guard Fort Sackville. So, that story doesn't really have a very happy ending, right? But Clark is trying. He is trying to keep this west part of our territory free of the British. All right, please turn your page to page 60. And before we start reading, I want everyone to look at the picture at the bottom. All right, one at a time with hands raised. What do we notice that is going on in that picture? Liam?
The land is like flooded.
Okay, they're definitely walking through water, flooded land or otherwise. Eric, what do you notice?
Some of them might be low and they're trying to ambush in the bush.
Okay, they do kind of seem like they're sneaking, right? Okay. Noah, what do you think?
This is when the Henry Hamilton said they're not going to go through the waters, and they sneaked attack and ambushed Fort Detroit.
Ooh, could be. Angie?
They look cold.
They look cold. That was my first thought. My first thought was, I am so glad I'm in a warm building today. Do you think they had clothing that kept them super warm?
No.
Probably not. So these were very brave people. Hayden?
Well, I feel like the low tide became the high tide, and it's the ending the fight.
Okay, good guess about tides. We have learned they move in and out. However, this is in Indiana, so we don't have any tides here. So this would be by a river, but we do know our rivers flood a lot, right? Sometimes you go past the river and it's flooded out and the trees are in the water. So that could be very well what's happening. All right, I've got 3 more hands and we must read on. Quentin?
One of them was in the camouflage.
Yep. You know, it'd probably be smart to try to blend into your surroundings. Josiah?
They're foraging.
They're foraging through the water.
I said foraging.
Oh, portaging. They could. I don't know if they had boats, but if they did, yeah. Chloe?
They have a set instead of Syria.
Yeah. You think it'd be hard to fight in the winter. If you didn't have somewhere to live, they probably didn't even have a tent to sleep in at night. So I don't feel like there was probably lots of happiness right now, right? It'd be really hard work. All right, please follow along at the top of page 60 to hear more about Clark. All right, ending the fight in Indiana. Clark soon heard about the loss at Fort Sackville. He also learned that Hamilton was planning an attack that would sweep across Indiana and capture Kentucky. Clark did not want that to happen. A winter attack would be difficult due to the challenges of the weather, but it would be unexpected. Clark wanted to surprise the enemy. So, on February 5th, 1779, Clark and a group of more than 100 men set off from Kaskaskia for the 180-mile journey to Vincennes. Okay, I don't want anyone to talk, so we don't have time. Think about how long it would take to walk 180 miles in the winter, dressed as they were, carrying all of their guns, ammunition, their food, everything they needed. Okay, I've backpacked, the longest I've backpacked is 78 miles straight without going to the car. And it was very difficult. That took me 5.5 days. Okay, we would camp at night and get up and keep walking. But I had all the gear I needed, right? I had a tent, I had a sleeping bag, I had the warm equipment I needed to stay warm. I had my food very specially packaged the way I needed it. And they didn't have this. So really think about how tough this would have been for these people. Okay, so we're in the middle of the second paragraph. 180-mile journey to Vincennes. Clark's men encountered snow and ice. Cold rain caused rivers to flood. Sometimes they had to cross rivers, wading waist deep in the icy water. They came close to running out of food. The Americans were exhausted by the time they reached Vincennes on February 22nd. So it took them from February 5th to February 23rd. Anyone want to do the math? How many days did it take to walk 180 miles? Abby? 18 days. Okay, that's a lot of days to be marching outside in the winter. In Vincennes, Clark's strategy started with gathering information. A strategy is a careful plan. We knew that. A French hunter gave Clark information about how the fort was defended. Clark's strategy was to convince the British that his force was very large. He told his men to wait behind a small hill and wave flags as they marched around. The British on the other side of the hill saw only the flags. They thought as many as 600 men were attacking. Was that pretty clever? Yeah. Top of page 61. The Pinkashaw, I'm not sure I pronounced that right, that's part of the Miami tribe, and Kickapoo sided with the Americans. Even with this help, Clark's force was greatly outnumbered. But the British did not know that. Fighting began on the night of February 23rd. The Americans fought so well that Hamilton surrendered or gave up and agreed to stop fighting on February 25th. Hamilton and his officers were amazed when they left the fort to meet Clark and realized how few men had defeated them. Do you think they were a little bit embarrassed? Okay, so picture it. And I don't know, there are other movies, maybe you've seen other stories through history that have this same type of an idea. But if you have a very small group of people that have to defeat a large group, one of your best advantages is to make your group look bigger than you are. So instead of letting them see the actual soldiers, they marched around and held up all these flags and spread all around. So it seemed like they were surrounded by lots of people. So if they hadn't have done that, I don't know that they would have won. So Clark is our hero. Hamilton. Which country was Hamilton from? Let's keep it all straight. Josiah? British. Okay. And in the end, who won the final battle? Abby? Right, which would have been Clark, right? The colonists. So even though he didn't win all his battles, the final battle he won, and that's the one that mattered. Josiah?
And also, he was a traitor because he acted like he was a colonist.
Well, they had someone, the sneaky French spy, right, that was trying to help him too. So do you think there was a lot of that going on? People kind of switching sides, spying on the other? Yes. And I don't think this word's been brought up yet. You'll learn more in 5th grade. And 5th grade is really when you do all of U.S. history. But if you were a redcoat or a British person and you liked King George, you were called a loyalist because you're loyal to the king. Okay? And then everybody else, they kind of considered to be traitors. You know, you're a traitor to the king. All right, so the last thing we're going to do today is watch another chunk of that video we've been seeing, and it is going to show us those fights we just watched between Hamilton and Clark, okay? So I'll pause you a minute. When I'm back on, you'll see the video. All right, so here we go. I rewound just a bit, friends at home, so we get the whole story from the beginning of the colonists being upset with the king up to what we read today. So here we go.
The Indians would get to keep their homes and their lands in the West, at least for now.
But there was a problem. Many British colonists didn't want to play along with the agreement.
Many of them were eager to go west, to explore, to live, and to escape the possibility of high British taxes. On July 4, 1776, the colonists signed the Declaration of Independence and broke away from Britain.
The colonies now called themselves the United States of America and called themselves Americans.
The Americans and the British went to war. Most of the fighting occurred in the 13 colonies in the east.
But some important battles were fought west of the Appalachians too.
The man who commanded the British Army there was Henry Hamilton.
Hamilton asked the Indians to help Britain fight the Americans.
He met with tribal leaders and gave them food and guns. He even painted his face and did a war dance.
Hamilton told the Indians that if the Americans won, they would take all of the Indian lands west of the Appalachians.
So, many Indians agreed to fight the Americans, and there were violent Indian raids in the land we now call Kentucky.
Hamilton allegedly paid the Indians for each American scalp they brought him. That earned Hamilton the nickname the Hair Buyer. Later in the war, the British took over Fort Sackville on the Wabash in Vincennes.
And the fort's new commander was the old hair buyer himself, Henry Hamilton. In February 1779, Hamilton settled in for the long, harsh winter.
He was sure no Americans would attack because the fort was surrounded by flooded plains and rivers for hundreds of frigid miles.
He was wrong.
One Kentuckian who was fed up with the Indian raids was George Rogers Clark, a rough, confident man with long red hair.
He stood more than 6 feet tall, very unusual in the 1700s. The Indians called Clark Long Knife, and he could be a fierce, merciless fighter.
In 1778, Clark received secret orders from the governor of Virginia, Patrick Henry.
You are to proceed with all convenient speed to raise 7 companies of soldiers, to consist of 50 men each, officered in the usual manner and armed most properly for the enterprise. and with this force attacked the British post at Kaskaskia. Wishing you success, I am, sir, your humble servant, Patrick Henry.
Clark and his army of 170 frontiersmen easily captured the British post at Kaskaskia in current-day Illinois.
Then they looked to their next target, Fort Sackville in Vincennes.
On February 5th, 1779, Clark and his men began to march to Vincennes.
Here is the route they took. More than 140 miles on foot across flooded lands and several freezing rivers.
From the Journal of Major Joseph Bowman. After a week of marching, there is not 1 foot of dry land to be found. The men are much fatigued. It rained all day. We had no tents. We encamped near the river in stormy weather. We've had no food for 2 days. Camp is very quiet and hungry. Men talk of returning. Colonel Clark encourages his men, which gave them great spirits.
Finally, Clark's men, starved, freezing, and exhausted, arrived in Vincennes after dark on February 23rd.
The men hid behind a hill near the fort to rest.
Many French townspeople from Vincennes brought Clark's men food and dry gunpowder.
There were about 80 men inside Fort Sackville when Clark's men fired the first shot before dawn.
The British in Fort Sackville were taken by surprise. The Americans fired long rifles with deadly accuracy.
From the Journal of Major Joseph Bowman. The firing then began very hot on both sides. Several of the men in the fort wounded through portholes. One of our men hurt. Great sport for the Sons of Liberty.
Hamilton's men thought they were terribly outnumbered because of Clark's accurate fire.
And because Clark's men raised many flags to make them look like a huge army.
After several hours of fighting, Clark sent Hamilton an ultimatum. In Clark's words,
I expect you shall immediately surrender yourself with your garrison prisoners at discretion. If any of the stores be destroyed, or any letters or papers burned, you may expect no mercy, for by heavens you shall be treated as a murderer.
Hamilton argued for better terms. Clark refused.
at 10 a.m. on February 24, 1779, Lieutenant Governor Henry Hamilton and his garrison marched out of the fort and surrendered to American Lieutenant Colonel George Rogers Clark. 4 years later, in 1783, the Americans won the Revolutionary War and Britain gave up all claims to their lands south of the Great Lakes.
George Rogers Clark and his men had helped win the territory north of the Ohio River and east of the Mississippi for the Americans.
Okay, so we already knew that the Revolutionary War, they were fighting over the 13 original colonies, this area here. So all of this land that's now shaded in, that was all won during the Revolutionary War for the colonists. And this land up here with the lines, this is the part that George Rogers Clark and that group of fighting men also got for the United States. So all of this land was secured for our country as well. So things to remember. Hamilton was the guy from which country?
United Kingdom.
Yep, United Kingdom, Britain, England. And he was fighting against mainly who? Who was his nemesis? Josiah? Clark, George Rogers Clark. So George Rogers Clark, he was the real big tall guy that kind of tricked Hamilton into thinking that his army was huge and caused him to surrender. So when we think about Indiana and the Revolutionary War, George Rogers Clark is kind of one of our heroes, okay? All right, thank you all at home. I will see you soon. Thanks for listening.